We are in the midst of a monumental global paradigm shift that is reshaping society at every level and transforming the balance of power. Now, what's remarkable is that this was all predicted decades ago in a book called The Sovereign Individual. Now, this book, along with The Fourth Turning, which I've also covered in a separate video to this one, should be mandatory reading for everyone. It's a book I first read 4 or 5 years ago now, and it's one that has profoundly influenced how I make sense of the current global dynamics. And so I felt compelled to share the key insights with you guys. So without further ado, what is the sovereign individual? The Sovereign Individual, as I mentioned, is a book written almost 30 years ago now in 1997. I want to bear that in mind as we go through this, by two authors, James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg, that explores how digital technology is transforming society and the economic, political and social implications of this shift. Now, there's a few key ideas we need to understand. The first key idea we need to understand is how humans have progressed through four distinct societal ages, each defined by how power is distributed. So the first was the hunter-gatherer age, where power was determined by leveraging physical strength. The second was the agricultural age, where power was determined by leveraging land. The third was the industrial age, where power was determined by leveraging capital. And the fourth is the information age, which we're in right now, where power is determined by leveraging information. Now, as power has evolved across these ages, so too have the institutions that have been built to control and enforce it, none more significant than the state itself. And so the second key idea we need to understand is how governments emerged as the dominant force in society. So in early agricultural societies, property and surplus led to theft, which created a demand for protection services. The people who provided these services consolidated power and seized exclusive rights to enforce it. And so this marked the rise of the nation state as an institutional monopoly on violence. Now, violence in this context refers to coercion, right? Using force or threat to influence behavior. Now, the problem is that, like all monopolies, they are prone to abuse, and so governments begin to serve their own interests instead of those that they govern. And so to this day, this process of centralizing power through monopolized force continues to play out on different scales as a result of shifts in different technologies. So in the words of Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And so that brings us nicely onto the third key idea we need to understand, which is how technology influences the dynamics of power. So there are four key factors. The first is offense versus defense. So how easily can force be projected versus resisted? When offense dominates, power centralizes. When defense dominates, power decentralizes. The second factor is cost and accessibility of technology. So when technology is expensive and restricted, power centralizes. When technology is cheap and accessible, power decentralizes. The third factor is economies of scale. When large-scale production thrives, think factories, power centralizes. When small-scale production thrives, think freelancers, power decentralizes. The fourth and final factor is the dispersal of technology. So when technology is concentrated, power centralizes. When technology is distributed, power decentralizes. And so when we apply these principles to the modern world, we begin to understand why we're beginning to see the decline of the nation state. So in the industrial age, government relied on borders, taxation, and centralized authority to sustain power and control. In the information age, borders dissolve, tax becomes harder to enforce, and authority begins to decentralize. So, in other words, technology is creating a revolution in the exercise of power. The same way the printing press destroyed the church's monopoly on knowledge is the same way that digital technology is destroying the government's monopoly on violence. And so, for the first time in human history, technology is enabling the creation and protection of assets that lie entirely outside the realm of any government's territorial control. More simply, modern technology is increasing the power of individuals and decreasing the power of governments. Cue the sovereign individual. So, the sovereign individual is a direct response to the decline of the nation state and is the archetype of the future. So, what are the characteristics of the sovereign individual? Well, the sovereign individual is self reliant, meaning that they take full responsibility for their own income, security, and future, removing the need to depend on the state. They are privacy oriented, meaning they protect their personal data and communications from surveillance or state control. They have borderless identity, meaning they view sovereignty as personal rather than national, and so their allegiance is to values and not governments. They are digitally fluent, meaning that they are experts in using digital technology and tools to operate independently. They are asset sovereign, meaning that they hold wealth in secure, censorship resistant forms that lie outside the realm of governments. They are mobile, meaning they can move freely across borders to seek the most favorable conditions. And last but not least, they are economically agile, meaning that they are able to generate income globally and digitally, independent of any single economy. In short, the sovereign individual embodies the ideal of autonomy and personal freedom. So, with all this in mind, what does the future look like? Well, in the book, the authors made a few predictions. Firstly, they predicted the fragmentation of mass culture. So, people begin to favor niche communities, which is what we're very much seeing right now with the rise of social media. A reduction in government safety nets, so individuals are expected to take responsibility for their own health, wealth, and security. Rising global inequality, so in a globalized economy, the highly skilled earn more by being able to compete worldwide, and states lose their leverage to redistribute wealth. This we're definitely seeing. Geography becomes irrelevant. So, as work becomes increasingly digital, people can live and earn wherever they want. And so, as a result, they migrate to jurisdictions that offer better conditions like lower taxes and greater freedom. This trend we're definitely seeing accelerating. Cryptography empowers defense. So, the technology of encryption allows people to secure assets and trade at near zero cost without relying on state protection. This we're definitely seeing with the rise of Bitcoin and crypto. A decline in legacy finance, so digital currencies reduce the role of banks as individuals conduct transactions directly and enable escape from inflation and taxation. Again, we're seeing this with Bitcoin and crypto. Jurisdictional competition increases, so governments are forced to compete to retain productive citizens. Those that overtax or overregulate will lose their customers. And last but not least, identity becomes global and not national. So individuals make choices based on personal benefit instead of national allegiance. So, in other words, sovereignty becomes personal and not political. So, what is the takeaway from all this? The takeaway is this: the information age is creating a world where individuals, not institutions, hold the power. Those who adapt, those who become self reliant, and those who leverage digital tools and technology will thrive. Those who don't won't. So, hopefully, now you understand three things: why the rise of digital technology is fundamentally reshaping the structure of society, what the future is likely to look like, and how you can position yourself to thrive in this new paradigm. Now, for those that prefer written format, I've put together an article that expands on everything we've covered and more in this video. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and in the comments if you're watching on X. I'd also invite you to watch my video on the fourth turning. That is another extremely, extremely important concept you will need to be aware of. I appreciate you all watching. And as always, until next time, remember, the best is yet to come.